myself. My name is Funsho Elegbeleye. My friends call me Paul. I have been in Canada for about 12, 13 years. I came to Canada in grade 11, and I started from Hamilton actually, and I've been in Hamilton ever since. Moving from school to postgraduate work permit and ultimately to permanent residency. One of the reasons why I was seeking immigration assistance was actually just because of a lack of clarity. You know, there's a saying that you don't know what you don't know. And I definitely had a lot that I did not know. In the space of just asking like families and friends, like, oh, what did you do? And what did you do? And the tricky thing about immigration is what worked for Paul might not work for Peter. What worked for one person might not work for the other. So it can be very tricky just trying to navigate that. I think I found myself in that situation, and that's why I needed immigration help. So I actually heard about Loft immigration from it's so interesting how life works. But there was a colleague at my mom's workplace that their daughter had sought out Loft for immigration advice, and as you would have it, we were just looking for immigration lawyers because I just want to preface this: we looked for a ton of immigration lawyers. There's no other way to say this, but I honestly I'm a Christian, so like my story was just never right. Talking to these different lawyers, that's one, and two, a lot of the advice they were giving me was just based off of not just simply what they knew, but just not looking at to the through scope of my situation. They weren't very hands-on, and when you speak to someone or you speak to lawyers, depending on the emotions that you're sitting in, you could be giving them good information or giving them bad information. And I know at the time, just because of how sporadic it was and how clueless I was about my situation, I was giving a lot of good and bad information. And what was amazing about Loft Immigration was just their ability to kind of sift through that bad information and, be able to give clarity on what I was saying and what I was asking, and wanting to dig more, wanting to learn about my specific circumstances and how they could benefit me. Also doing work in the background, right? Like making calls on my behalf to call immigration on IRCC, and just figuring out, okay, what is the specific information and situation that for this individual person. So I think the biggest factor was honestly, like I said, it was a lot of just wisdom in seeing that, okay, this person is very thorough. The people I'm speaking to are very helpful. And they are allowing me to not only share my case on what I'm going through, but looking to see how we can optimize for my situation. And I think that was just like, once I saw that, even though I was even talking to a couple of lawyers, I remember having like a family meeting and telling my mom and my dad, and like just being like, yeah, you know what, I don't think anybody else is going to be as helpful as Loft Immigration. And turns out I was right. Okay, so the services that like Loft provided me was quite extensive in my opinion, right? And at least compared to some of the other lawyers I went through. So firstly, there was an initial consultation to kind of figure out my circumstance. The initial consultation gave like a lot of peace of mind, just because a lot of consultation offices, right, they just, they kind of hook you in by making you spend, and it can be very daunting because, you drop this and you now want to see it through, but you're not sure about if they're going to be any help to you. So that consultation was nice to know that, okay, it was finding out more about what I needed to do and when we needed more consultations, right? Because at that point, we needed to go through it's known as a GCMS note. A GCMS note is just basically a note from your immigration officer, so the one looking over your file, and just being like, okay, these are the steps that they took throughout the entirety of your file. And after that, we needed to, have a following consultation to sit down and actually figure out, okay, what was the note saying? Could Loft Immigration break down exactly what was written there because it was a lot. It was like 20 something pages. I am not that well versed, but Loft was, and they were able to go through that with me. And it was just an amazing time because it kind of put a lot of clarity on what was missing, what the situation was, and what the mistakes were. But upon reading that, that was when we decided to flagpole. My situation was, it was very specific to me. So I was in a vulnerable situation with permanent residency, and I had done my work permit, my permanent postgraduate work permit. I had filled that out, and I had entered the express entry, and thankfully I had gotten a draw for the point category that I was in. But unfortunately, I was in a very precarious situation where essentially my work permit had expired, my postgraduate work permit had expired, but I was in the draw. Now, I had assumed that, because this is speaking with family and friends again, and doing some small Google research, I had assumed that if I had applied for my work permit, I wouldn't need to, or I had applied for my permanent residency, excuse me, I wouldn't need to reapply or for my work permit. Like, I didn't need my work permit anymore. Critical mistake. And I was now in a position where technically I was not supposed to be in Canada. So this obviously was threw my family for a loop. And when we had requested the GCMS notes, the beautiful thing was that Loft Immigration was able to kind of see that, okay, this is the situation. They had also, like I said, one of the beautiful things that they did was they had called IRCC and inquired specifically about my situation, and we're able to break it down in a way that, like, okay, this is exactly your situation and this is what you need to do. And we found out that, and they found out that the biggest thing that we needed to do was the flagpole. And essentially what flagpoling is going into the border and trying to come back into the country with status, because that was what I was missing, right? Like I said, I had already made my applications and all that for permanent residency, and I needed to get status so that, like, at that time, even though I wasn't technically a permanent resident, I had status to be in the country. I would want to give a shout out to Mrs. Ade. She was she is just an amazing person. One of the lawyers of Loft Immigration. Long story short, she was just amazing because she took out the time to come to my place, pick me up, take me to Niagara, which was the closest flagpoling and border service to me, and went through that whole process. And I just found this just endearing because at the time, she was actually pregnant. Not only was she dealing with, her own life issues, but she was also kind enough to help me with mine. And it was just reassuring going to the border with somebody that, obviously was looking out for your best interest and was able to talk to, to different border agencies and just care for me on what felt like a very personal level. I'm just so thankful to Miss Ade because everything was a very smooth process, smoother than I would have ever imagined. She was very thorough with me and was trying to make sure that I had a good impression with the immigration officers at the border. And honestly, I really appreciated her help because I feel like just the conjunction between me and her was able to make a solid impression that, okay, this is the situation with me. Like, I'm not trying to sneak into the country illegally, or I'm not like someone who hasn't paid my dues in Canada, because like I said, I've been here for 12 years. And ultimately, I believe that encounter was what led to where I am at now, where because that encounter, I got my visitor's record, which allowed me to legally have status in Canada. And even though, like, we had plans to do a couple of things to ensure to send to IRCC to be like, hey, look, he has a visitor's record, there was this situation, but we fixed it now. I can't lie to you, we didn't need to do all of that. Like, about 2 weeks, like 2 weeks later, boom, I got my permanent residency. And it was just, I will never forget how it felt. It was just beautiful. And honestly, it was such a surreal moment for me. Still is, to be honest, even a while after. Just because you never know how much just good advice can change your situation. Like, you can't really put a price on good advice. Just because I had gotten so much bad advice and so much terrible counseling and such expensive counseling as well. But to have things just kind of clear up just like that with good advice is just a surreal moment. And the rest is, as they say, history. So I was able to get my permanent residency. I was also able to have peace of mind because, to be very honest with you, like I said, you can't put a price on that. My family was also able to be very relieved because, like I said, I've been in Canada for a while. That's a hefty investment for myself and my family. So it was just peace of mind to know that, okay, finally I've got my permanent residency, and I can start working towards citizenship and all of that. And it was just very reassuring to be in that position of like, hey, everything is worked out and we can finally see the end of this whole journey and this mistake that ultimately was my fault. My family was like, man, we were too overjoyed. I remember my mom crying. I remember my dad just being super proud of the fact that like this was just behind us, because now we're able to just go to a different aspect of our lives, and I can go to a different aspect of my life, and not having to worry about not having status, not having to worry about like not being able to, because throughout the entire time that I did not have status legally, I was not allowed to work, and that's what I did. So I was unemployed for that entire period of time, and that was obviously very challenging. Now that I'm in a better spot, now that I've gotten my permanent residency, I'm just super grateful to Miss Eddie, super grateful to just the entire Loft Immigration Service team, and everyone at Loft Immigration. Honestly, I think the biggest thing I could say again is you cannot put a price on good advice. Temporary immigration status is behind me. And I owe a big part of that to Loft Immigration. Honestly, I did this testimonial because I felt like I wanted to share my story in some way or form. Hopefully give people just kind of hope to recognize that at the end of the day, you can work it out. If anyone feels like I felt at that point, it felt like this was not going to be able to work itself out. But another beautiful thing about not putting a price on good advice is just the peace of mind and reassurance a professional will give, and someone who is really dedicated into helping you and figuring out your situation. You can't put a price on that. And just seeing how everything worked out, and I just felt that it was important for me to share my story, and to give a shout out to the big people of Loft Immigration to hopefully empower them to help more folks and help more people like myself. Yeah.